Okay, here I am again. I'm going to do a lecture on abnormal psychology, and so I'm going to focus on this word. Let me get my pen on. Normal. So I don't really believe in normal, but here's the normal curve, and at the middle, right here, is the average. Why is it the average? Because most people do that, just like on the test. What would be the average? But some people score really high, some people score really low, but that's extreme. Talk about this, let's just talk about neuroticism. If you remember, being neurotic is nervous. Some people are right in the middle. Sometimes they're nervous and sometimes they're not. But some people like me are very nervous. I might not be all the way at the edge. And some people are not nervous at all, like they're not nervous enough. Okay, so that could be the extremes. Now, who determines these extremes? I don't know. People do, but if we were in a statistics class, I could go, hey, how many standard deviations do I have to go out before I consider something to be extreme? Now, when I talk about abnormal psychology, two different sources, sometimes you're just born a certain way. Like I might have just been born a nervous person, high strung, OCD. But sometimes something happens in the way you were raised or an experience, for instance, PTSD, a traumatic experience happened to you. You wouldn't have had that disorder without an experiential factor nurture. Now, early on, now I should erase at least this part. William Blake has this painting, but early on, what they thought that psychological disorders came from was demonic possession. That you were possessed by demons, and demons were causing, well, I kind of agree with it. So, I don't know. This is an old idea, but I kind of believe it is a new idea too. Okay. Forgot I had this quote on here. Reminds me of me. The worst part of having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. Every time I get real about my depression and anxiety, people freak out. It's like, oh my God, he's losing it. It's like, yeah, but that's who I am. And it's like, uh-oh, put on a happy face, Tim. Pretend like everything's okay. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh my goodness, I love the joke. Okay, so enough of that. Hippocrates, the Hippocratic oath, the father of medicine. He was one of the first people to say, no, you're not possessed by demons. What's causing your disorder is a chemical imbalance. He was way ahead of his time, but he's the father of medicine. Now, those are the only two things you really need to know about Hippocrates, that he was way ahead of his time by rejecting this idea, but his biological cause was a little wrong. I'm going to show it, but you don't need to know it for the test. They're called the four humors. You see, you have yellow bile, blood, phlegm, that's gross, and black bile in your body. And according to the Greeks, if these were all in the right proportion, you would be okay, balanced. But if you had too much yellow bile, you get to be a hothead. Or too much black bile, you'd be like me, neurotic and nervous and worried. And if you get too much blood, yeah, you might be happy, but too happy, like manic. And if you get too much phlegm, you'll be sedate. Now, maybe Baby Buddha is not the right one, but you'll be real calm and mellow. Okay, so enough of that. For the test, I do want you to know this distinction. The early distinction was between this neurotic disorders. This looks like neuron right here. Your nerves or your neurons are off. That's why we call people high strung, nervous. Anxiety disorders are neurotic. There's something wrong with your nervous system. Psychotic disorders, you're a psycho. I can be a psycho. Is that there's something wrong with the way you're seeing the world. It has nothing to do with your nervous system. It's this thing on the top of your head called your brain is delusional. You're seeing things wrong, Timothy. Shutter Island. I want to go into detail, but delusional means you're under false beliefs. Okay, so psychological disorders, the good news and the bad news about this section. The good news is very organized. The bad news is there are about 19 disorders. Limit to these 5 little folders. Like talk about 5 anxiety disorders, and then 3 mood disorders, and maybe 3 kinds of schizophrenia, and then a few types of dissociative disorders and several type of personality disorders. So if you just keep in mind the folder, then that'll make your job easier for the test. These are all about your nervous. Okay, the first folder, number 1. Now, phobias. That makes sense. If you're afraid of something, you're nervous of it, right? So fears, I don't have to even study this for a test. What's a phobia? A fear? What's it a fear of? Oh, a thing. That's why we call it arachnophobia, because the arachno means spider and the phobia means fear. Fear spider. Or brontophobia, fear lightning. Acrophobia, fear heights. I don't know what snakeophobia is, but whatever. Now, I have the number one fears of the United States of America on here. And look at number one. It's not dying, it's public speaking. Dying is number two, which is crazy because I do public speaking for a living, but you know how that is. Now, I don't like claustrophobia, being, pent in, and there's your brontophobia, fear of thunder and lightning. Number two, panic disorder or panic attack, which most people call it. You don't have to write this down, but if you suffer from panic attacks like this dude sometimes, you know what it is. It's like your nervous system is all like you've been taking some crystal meth. Like you're going, I'm all geeked out. It's like I'm afraid I'm going to have a heart attack. Something bad is going to happen. It's like, Tim, calm down. I call it a tornado. You can't see it on here, but it's a tornado. It comes out of nowhere. It's not like, why are you afraid, Tim Spider? I don't know, but I'm really afraid. So it's your nervous system getting kicked on when it shouldn't. And one of the things is this sense of impending doom. It's like something bad's going to happen. It's like, yeah, but Tim, what is it? Is it heights? Is it spiders? I don't know. But I'm telling you, it's really bad. So what I tell myself is my nervous system, which was meant for my evolutionary survival, is kicking on right now. And it's telling me there's a bear. Remember us talking about fight or flight? But there is no bear. So I'm going to find a bear even if there's not a bear because my nervous system is telling me I'm under attack even though I'm not. So the only way to do this is to calm your nervous system down and then you'll calm your mind down. This is why I don't agree with doctors a lot of times. They're trying to treat my mind. No, treat my nervous system. Okay, so one of the techniques you might want to try is square breathing. This is called square, just like a square breathing, where you hold, inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, then hold the out for 4 seconds, and then you go around and around to where if you get your lungs under control here, then all of a sudden you'll get your nervous system under control. Okay, number three is called generalized anxiety disorder. Let me see if I have my pen on here. This is the one I have the most. I'm not kidding. Just worrying all the time is what I call it. So for the test, I just worry all the time, but I can't tell you what I'm worried about. I mean, I can, but I get to the point where if I'm not worrying, then there's something wrong. And this is why I have this picture of the wind on here. It's not like the tornado. It's just like the wind is kind of blowing all the time. That ambient worry that's in the background, kind of like that ambient noise that you can't get rid of. I just can't. So don't write all this down, but this is so me. I can't let go of things. I mean, I'll just sit there at nighttime going, is my curtain straight? I don't know. It's like, are my clothes folded right? Some of that's OCD, but I imagine worst case scenario. I always think I made the wrong decision no matter what I buy. I'm writing on a computer I just bought. It's like, did I do the right thing? You know what I mean? I can't sleep. I have stomach problems, the whole 9 yards. Okay, so that's the generalized anxiety disorder, just basically worrying all the time. Number four is OCD, and so I'm OCD boy. You have the O and the C part, so I'll get into that in just a minute. But when I talk about OCD, it's like I usually talk about the O part first. Now, the O part is the thought. Okay, so I can't stop thinking about something. And the reason I showed that little polar bear is because I saw a presentation where a guy showed a polar bear like that. Then he never talked about it again for an hour. And the thing is, I couldn't stop thinking about the polar bear. It's like, why would he put that on there? And so when I start thinking about something like in the coronavirus, it's just like, oh my God, my house is so dirty and I can't get that out of my mind. It's like, oh, then that leads to the compulsion where I'm going to clean and clean and clean. Okay, so this is the thought up here, thought. And the thought is what's driving the behavior. Now, if I was in class, I usually tell a lot of stories about myself, but one of the things I do is check. And I'll be like, check, did I lock the door? And then I'll go down to my car. It's like, wait a minute, did I lock my door? And that thought gets in my head over here. And it's like, it'll make me go check my front door again. And I'll do it like 8 times in a row, knowing that I did it, but the obsessive thought won't let it go. Okay, so I don't know if this comes out good on your computer screen. Does this bother you? Like this right here? That bothers me. It's like, see, what happens is I have this thought, like, did I check my door? And it makes me anxious. And then I'll go and check the door, and that'll give me relief. But then the thought comes back, and then I have to keep checking the door over and over and over. I don't know if you're this kind of a person. I'm totally this kind of a person. I take medication for it, but I can't completely blunt myself out, or otherwise I can't be your teacher. Okay, finally, number 5. It doesn't really belong in the anxiety category, but I put it there because you're worried about your body, your health. There's other kind of body disorders where you lose sense of sight or whatever else, but I'm not going to get into those. But see, psychosomatic is an old word. Psycho, that's my mind. Remember psyche? Somatic, that's my body. My mind influenced my body. So I'm always worried about, this is hypochondriacs. This is the older term, hypochondriacs, but I use it because everybody knows what a hypochondriac is, I think. Somebody that always thinks they're sick, always looking, yeah, and then eventually their mind does make them sick. We're right in the middle of the coronavirus. It's like, nut up, it's going to be okay. You know what I mean? But the reason I put it here is I think it's a form of OCD for your health, where your thought, I'm sick, leads you to go to the doctor and take medicine all the time. And you're just OCDing on your health instead of how clean are your floors. I hope I made sense on these first 5 that are the anxiety disorders. Okay, so this next section, sorry about that. See, we were up here with anxiety. Remember my energy model? Now we're going to go down here. Over here is good. People want to be over here and here. You know what I mean? It's like, that's not bad because you're on the positive side of the spectrum. Okay, so talk about mood disorders. I could talk about like me and my rage problems, you know what I mean, or being too manic. But what I want to talk a lot about is this one right here, being too sad. I don't know if you have depression, but I do. I just had an episode this morning. It's like, dang, can't believe I showed my ass again, but that's the way it goes. And so I'm not talking about you're sad for 2 weeks because like somebody in your family passed away. I'm talking about you're sad every single day. I mean, if I was in class, I was gonna get really real with you right now because this is the fucking thing I got. You know what I mean? I don't know why I got it. I don't have diabetes, but I have this. It's not a choice either. I do struggle a lot with this one right here. I mean, I have all these on here. Don't want to eat, fuck everything, you know what I mean? I feel low in energy sometimes. I get angry and irritable. All this stuff, thoughts of suicide and death. I always feel worthless, but that's why I lecture on worth so much. You know what I mean? Things I feature is this despair. Golly, I was just there today. I can't believe this. When I talk about despair, look at how the suicide rates for both male and female, or total males, females, are all going up. I mean, a lot of people are committing suicides, including, unfortunately, soldiers. More soldiers die in suicides than actual military action now. That's fucked up. I mean, come on, there has to be something done. Now, one of these sentiments when it comes to despair is nothing I do matters, and they use this analogy of a feather in the wind. Let me see if I can get my feather to come on here. That you're just being blown around by these turbulent forces and they're out of your control. I should have done a better job blowing my feather around a little bit right here. And that people get this feeling like nothing I do matters. The universe is conspiring against me. Okay, so you don't need to know this for the test, but if you suffer from depression, you need to know this. It's like what they did with these dogs is kind of very mean research, but they would put these little dogs on this cage, and there's a partition right here. I don't know, I don't have my pen on. Here it is right here. And if the dog wants to, it can jump onto the other side. That's the control condition. In the second condition, they'll put the dog over here. And what they'll do is right down here, I don't know if you can tell, but they light it up with an electric shock and the dog jumps onto the other side to escape the shock. It learns to escape. In the third condition, what they do is they put the dog over here, and this is the main condition. And no matter which side it jumps to, it's always going to get shocked. So what does it do? It hunkers down and it just learns to take it because nothing it does matters. And see, sometimes in life you're in this cage. You're fucked. Nothing you do is going to matter. But sometimes you're in this cage or this cage. Now, for people that grew up, like pound puppies, these backgrounds where you had these traumatic experiences, what happens they do now is this. They'll put all the dogs in this condition. Well, the group 1 and the group 2 just jump to the other side just fine. But group number 3 just sits there and takes it. It's in this new situation in which it could escape and exert its own will, but because of its feather in the wind mentality, nothing I do matters. In this situation, which looks like, smells like, feels like the old situation, traumatic experience, it now hunkers down and takes it and learns to be helpless. This is the story of my fucking life. And so if you suffer from depression, just get to this into your head. Some cages are different than other cages, even though they seem inescapable, they are. Okay, enough about that. Number 2. Okay, depression's easy, right? It's not easy, but it's easy to understand. You're just constantly sad. This one, speaking of the word sad, just keep that in mind. S-A-D. They made it like this for a reason, that people get depressed in certain seasons. Should pick a different color pen maybe down here. Depressed in certain seasons. And I don't know. I like it when it rains and storms. I get real happy. Maybe that makes me satanic, but whatever. Like, oh, I'm happy when it's sunny over here, and I'm sad over here when it's, cold and I have to stay inside. Well, there's more to the story than that. The real research, if you look across this way, now let me get back to my pen here. I can measure this longitudinally and be scientific. This can be quantified, back to quantitative versus qualitative research. Now, as you move up towards the Arctic Circle, or I could say down towards, Antarctica, but let's just keep this in mind. As you move up towards this way, we look at how many people commit suicide, have depression, all kinds of, stuff. You can see now depression is more prevalent up in here than down here where we have sun all the time. So there's scientific research that starts to show as you move further, you get more and more depression. You can see it systematically. There's almost a perfect correlation between latitude, am I saying the right thing? Hopefully, and depression. Hopefully I said that right. Okay, so the cure is for people up here in, let's say, Seattle or something, Washington, is to sit in front of these UV lamps because that will generate the things that will, it's not just like, oh, I'll be happy because I'm sitting by something bright. No, we learned about, how our eyes are connected to our thalamus, which is connected to the production of melatonin, and also things like vitamin D and other things that the sun does for us. Okay, so just keep in mind, SAD, it's the winter blues usually. It could be about other things, but usually, about wintertime blues. Okay, so the last of the mood disorder is called bipolar disorder. So make sure my pen is on here. Bi means two, right? So two poles, what does that mean? Oh, you're too positive. You're supposed to say positive or you're too negative. So too positive is where you're getting manic, and too negative right here is where you're getting depressed, if that makes sense. I like the old term manic depression a lot better than bipolar. If you look at it, what's manic? Oh, too positive, too negative. That's supposed to be like the poles on a battery. Sorry, my pen's not going all the way through right there. But anyway, you might know people that are bipolar. You might struggle with this issue, and the idea is to get you in the middle. But my thing is, then that flattens you out. Nobody likes to be flattened out. That's my problem with antidepressants. They flatten me. I mean, I wish I was like this all the time, I was like on speed or something all the time. But no, I'm down all the time. This other part of the spectrum. So anyway, that's the third disorder. It just has to do with these mood swings. And the idea is we don't want people swinging all over the place. We want to level them out somewhere in the middle between manic and depressed. But most of the people I talk to don't like living in the middle. Okay, so this is folder number 3, if you think about this, the third group of disorders, which is called schizophrenia, and is probably my favorite one to lecture. It's the last one I'm going to talk about on this section, and I have this model of reality. These little eyes are pieces of information, if you remember, and my senses can detect these, and then I filter it out, and I perceive the world around me. Now, for most of us, we're not schizophrenic, so our perception matches pretty good. I don't know if I have this arrow to what's over here. I don't know if I do have it over here. So our reaction is not a misreaction because we don't misperceive what's going on. But for the schizophrenic, it's different. There's evidence that when this information comes in, they can't filter it. And so now when they go to perceive the world, there's too much information and they get confused. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it's similar in a way if you struggle with ADD or ADHD, right? You can't filter some of this excess information out. The other evidence there is there's a jumbled upness to the information that's coming through to the schizophrenic. Now I'm worried because behind here I have a little picture and it's not going to show. This is a picture of your brain, but if you remember, in the middle of your brain is that little circle called the thalamus, and when they do autopsies on schizophrenics, they notice that their thalamus is distorted. Thalamus. And that's the mailroom that sorts the mail to the right places for our senses. No wonder they misperceive the world. Not only is too much information coming in that they struggle with, but at the same time, I want to get my eraser for a minute, because I want to talk about one other thing. But at the same time, it's getting all jumbled up at the thalamus. Now, one of the things that people with ADD or ADHD, if I can get my pen over here again, ADHD take is things like Ritalin, or they take things like Adderall. And the idea is that the Adderall will get rid of some of this excess information. They can focus right in. For a while, Major League Baseball players were taking it because it would get rid of all the extra information. They could just focus in on the ball. Okay, so schizophrenia, you don't need to know this for the test, but the more related you are, the more likely you are to have it. That's where it's like you're born with it. See, identical twins versus just the general population. How much are we in common? So there's a big DNA component that, this is driven by, some kind of family history, not a history of abuse, but a history of genetics. Okay, so why do I have this on here? One of the ideas that scientists have about psychedelics is they induce a psychotic state. Well, what is psychotic? Well, psychotic is delusional, which would be the same thing as schizophrenic. They make you schizo for a while. I don't know if you can read that. And so after you come down off your trip, you're not schizophrenic anymore. And so this is kind of this Western idea of psychedelics. They induce schizophrenia for, let's say, 10 hours, and then you come down from schizophrenia because no longer are the walls melting or bad things happening. And that you don't have to live there all the time, so it's kind of fun to visit for every once in a while. Now, I have a different idea, which is driven by Eastern thought and a lot of the great trippers, that you're already in a psychotic state, and this is why they call it the medicine. When I went to the Church of the Peyote Way, do you want the medicine? Yes. What does the medicine do? It takes you out of your psychotic state and it shows you the truth. Now, that's a whole different idea, but if you took my psychology religion class, I would go into that idea in a lot more detail. This is why I have Sid Barrett on here. Forgot I had this on here. I was just listening to my Pink Floyd this morning. Usually most mornings I am, but one of my favorite songs is Shine On, You Crazy Diamond, C-S-Y-D. The album is Wish You Were Here. Why do we wish Sid was here? I thought he started the band. That's because Sid Barrett just kept taking acid and acid and acid and acid until he made himself permanently schizophrenic. In the South, we call that permafried. That boy's done permafried himself to where you made yourself permanently schizophrenic. And if you listen to this album on Shine On Your Crazy Diamond, you used to shine like the sun. Now there's a look in your eyes like black holes in the sky. All these different things it says. You reach for the secret too soon. You cry for the moon. I mean, it talks about him going into the madness and never coming back. So, 3 types of schizophrenia, and then we're done for the day. Remember when I talked about things getting jumbled up? Disorganized talks about that jumbled up feature. So here we go. A lot of these people talk in disorganized speech. They call it word salad. Unfortunately, a lot of people that are mentally ill sometimes might be homeless. It's kind of like the bag lady. I don't mean as a stereotype, but just talking to herself about monkeys and aliens and this and that and going to the dollar store, and it just all goes together and it doesn't make any sense. It makes sense to her, I guess, but has a lot to do with her thalamus and how her brain is organizing information. The other thing, if you remember affect, cognition, affect, behavior, their energy's off. They just get flat energy like they're real robotic, like they have no spark to them. Or if they have emotions, they might smile at things that are horrifying. And so their emotions are off. Now, I was going to talk about this word salad for a minute. I think I have this on here, and I'll just let the results speak for themselves. But this is from a guy, a very famous guy. He's dead now, but you can hear his disorganized speech.
Oh my goodness, I've been carrying Linda Ding Dong across these little piggybacks on Ruby Poop. We're up with Mother Goose flying this whole world.
If down the line you were actually given a parole date, what would your plans be?
I would go poof,
Poof.
poof.
Prisoners denied parole for 5 years.
That's cool.
I mean, Charles Manson here, he's talking about Mother Goose and going poop, and you can see, like, his mind is in a different place. Some of it's delusional, but some of it's just, like, gibberish. So that's what I call gibberish. Okay, the second kind is even more interesting. It's probably the most interesting because these people are paranoid. So paranoid means you think people are out to get you. So very suspicious, overly suspicious of others, and they suffer from delusions. So you can talk to this person all day long. They'll make sense in a way, but you're not going to believe what they're saying. You're really not going to buy into their story. They have some, I call it conspiracy schizophrenia. They always got this conspiracy going on. I don't know if you watched the movie Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson, but it's kind of like that movie. Even though in the movie he was a paranoid schizophrenic, but he was also right. Okay, so I usually use different examples about delusions. I won't add delusions on the test, but delusions just means false beliefs. One of the false beliefs schizophrenics have is that people are controlling me, like aliens are inside of my head and they're making me do things I don't want to do. Sometimes serial killers will talk about stuff like this. Now, another thing that they have is delusions of grandeur, like they're a big shot when they're not really a big shot. And so that's not true. Like they work at Circle K, but they think they're a secret undercover operative and they have this whole story to tell you. A third thing is delusions of reference. They start to see patterns and like that's just where conspiracy comes in and things come together that aren't really there. And then fourthly, they think people are out to get them. So I was going to give a couple of examples on the next few slides just for, I don't know, entertainment purposes, if we were in class, I would go into these examples in a lot more detail. And then we'll move on to the third type of schizophrenia. Okay, I almost ran out of steam there. We got just a little bit left, but anyway, I don't know if you've seen this movie, A Beautiful Mind. It's a really good movie, but it's based on a real professor of mathematics. I can't remember the university he taught at, but he started to become convinced that he was part of this international conspiracy, and then the FBI was involved, and this, that, and the other, and it's like, no, he was just schizophrenic, where he started having delusions of reference, and the persecution, people were out to get him. Sorry about that. There was a fly coming in from outside, and that, this all started to consume his life. Now, that's not really the example I like to focus on. The example I like to come back to is Mr. Kooky over here, Charles Manson. Because Charles Manson, I don't know if you know this, but he was convinced that the Beatles were 4 angels that lived on Earth. Not just people, but they were real angels, and that they were constructing their album specifically with hidden messages. I don't have this on here for him. And they were making these hidden messages, and they were telling him these things to do to organize the revolution, especially on their album, the White Album. And I don't know if you've listened to the White Album, but it is very trippy. The Beatles were doing a lot of acid when we were making this album. Give me a break. But he started to think songs like, well, of course, Revolution, the Revolution songs, Revolution number 9 especially, but Piggies, and let me see, what are the other ones? Oh, Helter Skelter, and Blackbird is the one I'm looking for. Yeah, Blackbird singing in the dead of night, that he was supposed to organize an upcoming revolution of black people that were going to overthrow the white establishment, which maybe I'm all for that. But he's a white person that's going to lead the whole thing. And so he's reading this into these Beatles songs, that the Beatles wanted to start a revolution with black people, and that eventually he has, Sharon Tate and her unborn, baby killed, and also the LaBianca murders orchestrated, and all this was done in order to get him to initiate this revolution, because in his weird schizophrenic mind, he thought the white people in these nice rich neighborhoods are going to think it was black people that did it. It's going to start a race war. The blacks are going to win. I'm going to come to the top, and there's going to be a new organization. I just don't even understand it, because that would be one thing if you're a black person, but you're not. But he's reading delusions of reference, all these things into the album. It's kind of delusions of control too, because the Beatles are controlling him. So the next kooky guy is Son of Sam. I never understood why they didn't call him David, because his name's David Berkowitz. But this is why he's Son of Sam. Brief story. I wish I was in class to show a bunch of movies about it. But anyway, back in the day, in the 70s, David Berkowitz was living next to his landlord, who was named Sam. And he was convinced that his landlord was in league with Satan. And then eventually, he started getting his gun. It was called the 44 caliber killer. David was. I'm sitting here calling him Sam again. And he was convinced that Sam's dog was talking to him at night and telling him to go into these certain neighborhoods and to kill. And this is why I wish I could be in class and show all the movies about it. But in his mind, he was being controlled by the dog, and he couldn't do anything, to get away from him. And even he tried to shoot the dog one time, and the dog lived, and then that just verified that the dog was of Satan too, and that the dog is controlling him and forcing him to go out and kill all these people. Okay, so that's why I'm fascinated by schizophrenia, especially paranoid schizophrenia. Okay, third category, catatonic schizophrenia. Hopefully I'm doing okay. Still hanging in there. This one's real easy. I call it statue. That's why I got a mannequin over here. Statue schizophrenia, because people stand in these statuesque kind of poses. You can even go over there and repose them. That's what waxy flexibility is. If they do move, they just kind of move around like they're not there, and they don't notice you, but then they go back into these poses. So I have a few of the poses, or stupors. That's the catatonia. And then I'll show you the waxy flexibility, and then that'll be everything for the day, or at least on this first half of abnormal. I'll do a second half, which will be the fourth and the fifth folders coming up. Okay, so let's not waste any time. We'll get it to this first catatonic stupors. Look at this lady right here. This is my favorite one. She's just going to stand like this for 4 or 5 hours. And you could go over there, even this lady, she'll just sit there for all day long doing this number, all tranced out. That's why I call it trance schizophrenia. I don't know if they know they're doing it, but we could get into this in more detail. I think that movie Awakenings was about this, when they were using L-Dopa to bring people out of these catatonic, states. So here's wax. So trippy. Look at this guy. It's kind of mean in a way, because they just like treat him like a rag doll. They just go over there and pose him in different ways. But see, they make him open his mouth, and then they'll mess with his hands a certain way, and he'll stand and just sit in these poses any way that he's posed. Okay, so like I mentioned, these were the first 3 folders. This is the end of this lecture, but I'll have one more lecture that has folder 4, dissociative disorders, and folder number 5, which are personality disorders. I'll see you next time.